What's inside? Does he seek or does he hide?
You're not ready for this.
Can you spy him deep within? Little possum, black as sin.
You need to prepare yourself because this movie's a lot and it's probably the most misunderstood, disturbing movie ever made. Because not a single other person that I've seen talk about this movie has any idea what is going on.
There he lies.
Which makes a lot of sense because nearly every single one of them admits to only seeing this movie one time, and I can tell you right now, this is the kind of movie you have to watch multiple times to really understand what it's truly about.
Roast fox.
So luckily for you, I have seen it enough times that by the end of this video, you'll actually understand why it has a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. And may even ask, why is it not higher? Because I'm telling you, this movie is a 10 out of 10, and if you haven't seen it yet, go and watch it, come back because I'm fixing to spoil the whole thing. You can watch it for free on Tubi. So the poem that you heard at the beginning of this video is actually how the movie opens, and it acts as sort of this commercial breaks throughout the movie.
Only possum, black as soot.
But that does not mean that it makes it any less creepy, especially whenever it's accompanied with this. Because we don't know what's going on, we don't know what's in this bag, we don't know why we're in the woods, and whatever is in this bag is clearly gotta be bad. I'm serious, you have no idea. But whatever is in this bag seems to be important enough for actor Sean Harris to take with him on a little trip where he gets on a train and creepily stares at a group of boys, especially this one that is drawing in his book.
His name's a policeman.
Bollocks, is he?
I mean, just everything about the bag, Sean Harris, the poem, this entire film is creepy. Are you gonna tell me this looks normal? Does this creep you out? It should. If somebody's coming at you with a bag, you need to run! Because it's not just the thing in the bag that you need to be scared of. The boys on this train realize that very quick, because they're immediately creeped out, even whenever Sean Harris is just being nice, it seems, and asking,
What were you drawing?
nope. But at no fault of the kid, he runs away, and Sean Harris seems to go on his merry way over to what is his old house and steps into the foyer seeming to want to be greeted, but there's nobody there. He sets his bag down, he goes upstairs, and then we get this scene. And it's moments like that that most people just seem to look over and be like, well, that was weird, and they don't get the full picture and they don't try to watch it again, but I'm telling you, there's a much bigger thing that is going on here. And a lot of it's directly connected to what Sean's actually doing now whenever he's in his bedroom and he's looking at this old notebook that he then hides underneath the floorboard whenever he runs back downstairs to see his bag has been moved. Finding it in the kitchen, he calls for Morris, but he doesn't get a response. And in seeing that he's alone, he actually grabs the bag, goes out back to a burning barrel, and all we see is him pulling something out of the bag that seems to have these big 8 hairy legs like a giant spider. Not getting a clear view of what it actually is, Sean then stuffs it into the barrel and then bends back down to zip the bag up, and he sees a fox looking at him. And then, like another intermission, we get some more lines from this poem.
Bag is open, growing wider. What's inside? Man or spider?
And yeah, if you're curious, I do have the entire thing down in the description if you want to read it. And then in a scene that completely caught me off guard, we have Sean waking up because a bug is crawling across his face, and we get the briefest glimpse of the worst thing ever right behind him. And he freaks out too and shoves whatever it is off the bed, because it's no longer in the barrel. And then he gets up to go and wash his face for a second, probably because the bug and this nasty trash barrel spider demon, and we get these glimpses of it just behind him in the mirror, but never something direct on. That doesn't come till much later. It's always these brief little shots here and there, partial face and just from a distance or in a reflection, and it's still just pure nightmare fuel. You disagree? Here, you look at it for a couple seconds. Then Sean grabs it, stuffs it back in the bag, and he goes downstairs and he seems to stare at this door that is in the foyer that he didn't enter earlier whenever he first got to the house. And this seems to be a reoccurring theme, that this door is something that he is going to have to face, but just can't seem to do it yet. And then he's asked,
Going in?
And we see an older man sitting in the kitchen, and of course this is Morris, who he was calling for earlier, and he goes over to talk to Morris for a minute and tells him no, and then Morris immediately begins to ask about this puppet, which is an odd thing to ask whenever you're not even sure what's in the bag.
What exactly is it?
It's a puppet.
And in one of the most telling scenes in the movie, Morris asks,
You show that to children?
and seeming to dodge the question, Sean just responds,
I'm destroying it.
and then we get this weird banter back and forth about some sort of scandal that happened, and it just sort of ends with Sean spitting his coffee back out.
Now you won't get something from the jar.
Would you like something from the jar? Who knows how long it's been there, but would you like a candy? And then Morris tells him that he would like a demonstration
Before you kill it.
Can't kill it, it's a puppet.
Sean seems to be irritated by everything that is going on with Morris, so he tells him the place looks disgusting, and then he gets up, he grabs his bag, and he leaves, and he heads to a playground to go and smoke on a swing. Which, yeah, is odd, and it's not just us that thinks that, but even this family walking down the street that sees him thinks that's a little weird, and especially whenever we see that the puppet is a little bit out of the bag. So he gets up quickly, he grabs the bag, and then instead of returning to the house, he seems to go on a walk through the woods, where at one point he stops at this spot, seeming like he wants to walk off into the woods, but instead he decides that he's just going to go out to where some of the flat marshlands are and have another smoke on a rock completely off by himself. And then we get just a little bit more of the poem that seems to actually be read by Sean himself.
Look at Possum. There he lies.
And at this point you start to realize that this is coming from the notebook that he has hid under the floorboards. Whenever it's interrupted by somebody yelling, which is interesting because we don't know who Philip is until much later in the movie, but he's Philip. And the only reason that we know that is, one, because of course the credits, but also it's written in the front of the book. Whenever he hears this, he gets up and he runs off, and we see another wide shot of the puppet hanging out of the bag again. Then he seems to run all the way back to his very overgrown home, where he goes in to ask Morris if he can borrow his tools, and Morris goes and gets the tools, asks Sean if he's hungry, which Sean says no, but Morris simply says,
Roast fox.
Funny.
you're like, did he kill that fox and like actually roast it, or is it just a joke? Because I'll be honest, like this Morris guy makes me feel a little weird, just like everything in this movie. Then they talk a little bit more, and Morris actually brings up, it's sad because the one thing that Philip was good at was being a puppeteer, and now he's getting rid of his puppet. Then goes on to talk about how it runs in the family and his father showed him, and then quickly Philip interjects and says,
You're not my father, Morris.
and Morris immediately shuts down from this and just tells him, you know, bring back my tools whenever you get done with them. Shuts the door, and we have Philip once more staring at the door in the foyer. And this line seems to go over everybody's head and tells me a lot whenever they're reviewing this movie, because so often they simply call Morris his stepfather. I say all that because it'll come back around at the end of the movie. It'll all make sense, so just hold on. Then upstairs in Philip's bedroom, he's scrolling through the channels on the TV, but all he's getting is static, and we get this brief moment where some stuff comes through from the news talking about a missing boy that was last seen out in the woods and near the flat marshes. And then right after this, it's the next day, Philip's walking down this staircase where he's then called a pervert by these two older boys. Instead of saying anything or running away, he simply stares them down to the point that they are so creeped out that they walk off. Be honest, you would walk away too? Philip's creepiness doesn't end there, because then we just have him standing outside of this school to the point that somebody has to come outside and ask him, hey, what are you doing? And then just tells him, you need to leave because you're creeping everybody out. And leave he does, and he goes back off to the same spot that he was in the woods earlier whenever he chose to continue on over to the flat marsh, but instead now he continues off into the woods where he finds this weird-looking spider tree and sets the bag down. And it's the same scene that you see in the beginning. But it's also quickly interrupted whenever somebody yells, Philip! And he seems to freak out, and he grabs his bag and he takes off running again. And then over in the marshlands, he seems to be fed up with this thing in the bag and wants to get rid of it somewhere where he'll never have to deal with it again, and just throws it over the bridge. Now, it's not a very tall bridge, but if you were to leave something out there and just never go back, it would just be there. Problem is, he does go back to look for it, and it's not there. It seems that the puppet has crawled out of the bag and is now laying face first in the mud, the same as what Philip is. And you'll notice that it seems like it's getting a little closer and a little clearer every time it's shown.
Possum with his black balloons.
And then we get another wild dream sequence of what Sean is basically having nightmares of, and whenever he wakes up, it still scares me halfway to death. This caught me way off guard watching it the first time. I don't know how I should have expected this. And understand, I didn't just watch this movie. I put headphones in. I made sure it was dark. I was completely alone. So after being scared to death and getting everything together, Philip heads downstairs where Morris makes this statement.
Waking up, is it? Wants to get out.
Which is just a weird and interesting statement, but then we get an even weirder and seemingly more interesting story about a fox.
Tell me again about the fox.
And Morris seems to have to kind of pull this story out of Philip to get him to tell it.
Tell me.
And basically, he was traumatized by a fox whenever he was a kid.
His whole body was shaking like it was dying.
Not like a fox chasing him, but him finding a sleeping fox and some boys tormenting it and then tormenting him.
Pushed my face inside where it was rotten.
And for some reason, Morris thinks it's hilarious and begins to laugh after the story ends. And then hands him this little tin saying, "I believe this is yours." And of course, Philip just quickly responds and says,
Like this house, Morris.
Do people say stuff? I don't think so. And again, we get another odd response from Morris whenever he just brings up that they're going to tear down the old barracks and that it's...
Like a sin it is.
And at this, Philip just gets up, slowly walks out of the room, and then sees the door in the foyer again. And Morris asks him,
Going in?
but he doesn't yet. And then Philip's walking somewhere seemingly new that we haven't seen before, but through context clues, you realize that it's the old barracks that are fixing to be demolished. And then he makes his way deeper into the barracks until he comes across a room that has a mattress and a chair overlooking the mattress. Is some of this starting to make sense yet? Because it's getting closer and closer at this point. And it seems to be getting closer and closer to Philip because immediately after this, he goes outside, he grabs the puppet out of the bag and holds it up face to face and then throws it away from him. Where he then jumps on top of it and begins to just beat it down as hard as he can. I do not blame him. And then we see Philip grabbing the bag, filling it with bricks, and throwing it over into this little water reservoir and letting it sink along with the puppet. Where he then walks all the way back home, and whenever he enters into the house, he calls for Morris, but nobody's there except for a newspaper that has a picture of the missing boy right on the front. It's the same boy from the train station. Later that night, while Philip's up in his room, he begins to hear Morris reading the poem. Where Philip then makes his way downstairs to take the book away from Morris, and Morris, of course, is just surprised that he can draw so well. And then ask him, is it dead yet?
Is it dead yet?
Which, of course, you would figure he would just say, yeah, I drowned it in the water with a bunch of bricks. But instead, he says,
mind your own business.
Then goes on to tell Morris that, you know, hey, bye, I'm fixing to leave. And Morris is like, you're not going anywhere. The train lines are shut down for the holidays. And then tells him that he better tread carefully because people are beginning to talk.
About what?
Then ask him,
Do you read the papers?
and then Philip, looking back at him, clicks his lighter and asks,
Why didn't you burn, Morris?
as he gets up and he walks out, and Morris just laughs him right out the door. And this is the moment whenever we find out that the character Sean Harris is playing perfectly. His name is actually Philip Connell. Philip is the one that drew all of these pictures in this book, as well as wrote the poem. I wish I had this book to add to my collection back here. It would be awesome, because there's like some incredibly detailed stuff going on here. And apparently it's so awesome to Philip that he just has to go to sleep lying right next to the book. And the next morning, whenever he wakes up, he still goes to the train station because, I I mean, he doesn't really trust Morris all that much, but sure enough, the train station is shut down and he decides to go for a walk along the railroad tracks, where at one point he opens up that tin that was given to him by Morris earlier and he pulls out a picture of his parents. And then we get a close-up of the door in the foyer again, right? And you're starting to connect everything together. Is it starting to make sense? Philip, on his way back home through the marshlands, actually sees another fox lying still. And then once he passes it, he turns back around to see it standing awkwardly in the middle of the trail. Continuing on, Philip makes it back to the house where he enters in, calls for Morris again, but doesn't get a response. And upon going upstairs, whenever he enters the room, we see the puppet hanging on the wall in the reflection. Then we get some more weird shots along with some more lines straight from the Possum poem.
Say hello to Black Balloon.
Philip, seemingly distraught, sitting in his room, he plays with a lighter pretty close to the book and then looks up to see the puppet again. And he just is irritated by its presence even being back here. Of course, you're wondering how. How is it back here anyway? We'll get there. But he ends up hearing Morris outside and he grabs the puppet and he goes out to sit next to him while Morris is burning some more stuff in the barrel. And then Morris actually holds up a newspaper of the missing boy and says,
Happened before, I recall.
and then Morris begins to go into a little bit of detail about whenever Philip was a kid, there was another boy that went missing, as well as talking about a time whenever he came and taught at Philip's school after the Fox incident, where a colleague asked him
To teach them all a lesson.
then begins to talk about how scared they were after teaching them this lesson.
Petrified they were.
And then Philip stands with the puppet and goes over and stuffs it into the fire barrel and then shoves it down with the shovel. Morris continues on, seeming to talk about the boy that went missing whenever Philip was young by saying,
Stuffed them inside the bag, didn't they? Wore a mask, so they couldn't see him.
Philip completely breaks down and begins to cry as Morris seems to give him a hug and gives him one of the green candies,
I had no idea.
which immediately causes Philip to begin to vomit as he runs away. That night, Philip has what is one of the craziest dream nightmare sequences that I've ever seen in a movie. There's balloons on fire, there's a big bed where he's curled up at the top of it holding himself. There's the bag that's open with the puppet spilling out. There's also the jar of candy taking place of the puppet on the bed. All of it leading up to Philip being absolutely terrified, startling him so much that he wakes up and he gets up out of bed and he walks over and he looks at his own reflection in the mirror this time. Then he hears a knocking at the door downstairs in the middle of the night, and as he goes down the stairs, we see some blue lights flashing, and you realize that that's got to be the cops. And instead of going to open the door, Philip cowers in the corner on the stairs where they can't see him as they shine a flashlight into the house and then leave. And then as the police pull away, there's a sound that comes from the closed door in the foyer. And instead of checking it out, Philip just goes back to his room. Is it starting to make sense yet? Or are you just like most of the people that watch this one time? So then the next morning, whenever Philip gets up, he goes downstairs and he begins to walk over to the closed door as we watch from the kitchen. But before he opens the door, he seems to get scared and he heads his way to the kitchen, calling for Morris again. But the response that he gets is the TV kicking on back upstairs. And as he makes his way up there, we actually hear them talking in detail about the boy named Michael who went missing, and how he was last seen hanging around the woodlands, the marsh flats, and the abandoned barracks with a guy
wearing a beige raincoat was seen several times with a boy matching Michael's description.
Then we actually get some flashbacks of Philip on the train again with Michael, and of course, he is wearing a beige coat. And then Philip's got to turn the TV off. And then we get a sequence of Philip returning to all the places that he tried to leave the bag with the puppet in it, up until the point that he's at the abandoned barracks and so are the police, and he's hiding from them. He returns back home where he's also looking back through the burn barrel trying to find the puppet again, but it's not there. Then we have Morris showing up, asking him what he's looking for, and then telling him that we need to talk.
I want to talk to you.
So then we have Philip entering into Morris's room. Morris is telling him, somebody came looking for you, and I'm pretty sure it was the law. And then he asks Philip if he found who he was looking for. Philip says no, and Morris just simply responds,
Me Turner.
but Philip, kind of beside himself, says, "We burned it, though."
You're confused, lad.
And then Morris says that he's confused and doesn't look well, and then just tells him that he better lie low and that he's fixing to leave and he won't be seen again. So Philip just leaves and goes back to his room. Huh? But just hold on, I promise it'll all make sense here in just a little bit. And then starts some of the craziest stuff in the movie of Philip running away from something. And while he's running away, he ends up running to the school that he was at earlier, where he enters in and tells the secretary he needs to talk to Mr. Grant because he knows exactly what happened and what to do, but he didn't go to the police.
He knows what's happened. Said he'd come with me.
Of course, the secretary's just as confused as we are, and she's like, okay? And after she walks off, Philip ends up getting scared, and he runs and he leaves again. And we find him back at the old barracks in what is one of the coolest scenes in the movie. Because as everything seems so calm while he's sitting there looking at the picture of his parents again, this happens. And then we get some distant shots of him out in the flat marshes again, falling down and just crying as loud as he can. And then we're right back at the beginning with the big spider tree and the bag, as finally he opens it up and out comes the puppet named Possum. Philip is just as terrified as we should be as he takes off running as the thing descends on him from the tree, and it seems like as he's running through the barracks it's always around the next corner and he just can't seem to get away from it until finally they're face to face as it embraces him. And then he wakes up completely disoriented, holding the picture of his parents, and spits out one of the green candies.
The parcel opened, out it sprang.
Then of course this is a perfect time for us to get more lines from the poem.
The black, long-legged possum man.
Because after this, Philip is back in his room where he's calling for Morris again, but there's no response. Morris! As he's hitting his head repeatedly against the wall, but finally whenever he looks into the mirror to see his reflection, he sees the puppet wearing his clothes instead. And of course this shocks him and me and you and just everybody watching as he stands up and he finally catches his breath, but whenever he looks back at his reflection, he just sees himself. And it's at this point that he finally walks down the stairs and goes to the door in the foyer, where he opens the door, and whenever he enters in, we see where a bed used to be and where some blankets are still laid on the floor as he walks over and seems to pick up all that is left of his parents. Just a jar of teeth. I told you weren't ready, because that scared me so bad whenever it happened. This person jumps on top of him and pins him down to where he can't use his arms and pulls his mask off, and it's actually Morris. As everything begins to come together into one big picture, as Morris is sitting on top of him, berating him, calling him a dirty boy, and how he came to see mommy and daddy who are all burnt up, and then begins to just slap, ouch. And on top of that, he begins to call Philip a poor little orphan boy, but there's no need to worry because Uncle Morris is here.
Morris with his fingers.
Where he then pulls off his gloves and begins to ask Philip, did you miss these fingers?
Have you missed them?
The entire time, Philip is just screaming, no, no, please stop. You can essentially see what is going on and what has happened in the past. Morris continues to beat Philip on the ground to the point that he gets him to turn over, and because of this, Philip can see a chest that is off in the corner that is shaking like somebody is inside. And this seems to finally give Philip what he needs to take down Morris and take him out. He then stands up and he straightens himself up a little bit, goes over to the chest, and he opens it up, and sure enough, outruns Michael. Without looking back, without saying anything, he just runs away. And then in the last scene of the movie, we have Philip sitting out back with the burnt remains of the puppet off in the distance as we slowly get closer and closer shots of Philip's face. So does it make sense? Do you fully understand what happened? Listen to what I'm fixing to say. The puppet is not real, and Morris is not there. It's all in his head. I know this because this is my synopsis of the movie. And that's the reason whenever you watch it again and you have that understanding, the movie makes so much more sense. But that means a lot for Philip. Because here's what most people think happened is that Morris basically framed Philip, and Morris was the one that took Michael and set everything up to where it was Philip that was going to get in trouble for what Morris had done.
Silly boy.
Now you get what's coming.
But in reality, it was Philip the whole time. But just like puppeteering that he learned from Morris, he also learned all of this from him too. So a quick history of Philip. Basically, his parents died in the house that they're in throughout the movie. Both his mother and his father, and that left him either being an orphan or having somebody else come in, which leads to Uncle
Morris with his fingers.
taking over as his guardian. Problem is, Morris is not the nicest person. Because after the incident with the fox, Philip comes to Morris and tells him what happened, and Morris essentially handles it, being the man that wore the mask and put the kid in a bag so nobody saw him. Philip knew what happened.
But you said nothing.
And that's the reason that the fox keeps coming back up, because the fox is essentially Philip's innocence in the film. I actually had talked to Mr. Grant about it, and Mr. Grant, his teacher, had told him he would go to the police with Philip, but Philip's got to be the one to do it since he's the one that's seen some of this happen.
You knew it was me, didn't you, boy?
Philip, being scared, never goes, and of course from that is then treated nicer by his Uncle Morris by giving him these candies,
What's in them?
essentially causing him to swallow the truth and to never open up because of it.
Same as always.
And it's not necessarily clear if Morris has done this before or if he just developed a taste for beating children and other things to young boys, but he does make a brief mention in the movie about him moving around a lot,
Worked everywhere I have.
leading me to think this is not his first time, but whenever he becomes the guardian of Philip, that he now can't leave, and so Philip has to be the one that he takes all of this out on, leading to Philip writing this book called Possum, which of course is double-sided in him playing possum so that way he doesn't get harmed anymore by his Uncle Morris, but also of this kind of creature that is now living dormant that does want to come out and essentially harm the children that are around him.
What of my little child? Or what is playing dead? Possum with his black balloons will eat you up in bed.
Leading all the way up to modern day whenever he's now older
All broken Philip. All grown up.
and he gets fired from his job as a puppeteer because of an incident that happened.
Scandal by all accounts.
They'll take me back once that's gone.
If you're asking me, I think it was the same kind of incident that Morris was into.
You show that to children.
And so Philip essentially is on the run, returns home, sees Michael and can't help himself.
What were you drawing?
Maybe he sees something of himself in Michael. That's the reason that he gets called pervert by the two older boys, as well as everything pointing to him being the one who took Michael. Right? Because think of it, if Morris had taken Michael whenever he was set free out of the chest, why would he not stop and thank Philip? Instead, he looks at him with fear and runs away as fast as he can. Not once screaming about the body that's laying there next to him, because as far as Michael can see, Philip's the only one there. Because when you watch the movie back, you realize that every single thing that Morris has to say is either what Philip is already thinking, or he has to drag out these past memories from Philip. He never offers any new information. It is always something that Philip would have known already.
Law, I reckon.
And then we also have the puppet, Possum, which Philip is always carrying around with him, and whenever he opens up the bag a little bit in front of other people, it makes them extremely uncomfortable. Because of course the puppet is not actually there.
Can you spy him deep within?
This is just showing that dormant side of him that is wanting to get out.
Little possum, black as sin.
And that's the reason that he can't get rid of it, he can't drown it, he can't burn it, he can't just leave it somewhere. It's always there to follow him around. Because it's the trauma and the guilt that he is carrying from his past and from what he's recently done, but also from what he's thinking to do. And I believe that every single place that he left the puppet, trying to get rid of it, was a place that he was thinking of leaving Michael. But every single place seemed to be too much in the open, just like how a possum typically plays dead right out in the open, leading Philip to time and time again to see Possum as a reflection of himself, which is made very clear by this scene. Because just before this scene, Possum had finally caught up with Philip, and they were able to look each other face to face, and Philip was struggling with whether or not to finally accept that side of himself. And so whenever he sees himself in the mirror, he sees who he truly is. And so whenever he struggles with it and stands up, he sees himself one last time before he goes to confront the other part of himself. And effectively, by the end of the movie, he puts to death Possum and the trauma that he had from Morris, which is the only reason that he was able to actually let Michael go. Right, now that I put it all out there, it just makes me love this movie even more because of this deep, complex storyline about somebody overcoming their childhood trauma. And of course, this movie wouldn't have been anywhere near what it is if it wasn't for the incredible performance from Sean Harris as well as Alan Armstrong. They did amazing and completely carried this movie. And they were able to do this by literally not spending any time together outside of shooting, so that way they would still seem to have this weird distant relationship. If you go back and watch it, you will find that Sean Harris literally never smiled in this movie. But I hope that you're smiling after watching this video and having a newfound appreciation for what is Possum, which is a masterpiece of a movie because it has amazing writing, amazing soundtrack, amazing cinematography, amazing acting all the way across. And if you would like to see another amazing movie, you can check out this video right here. I thank you so much for watching. Have an extra blessed day, and I'll see you in the next one.